or you call it fall camp. It's like different people seem to call it different things on that, but the expectation is right there at the very beginning of the month. Look there for that kind of like first Saturday type time in the beginning of August. Like, let me see if I can pull up an August calendar. Because it typically always starts right there around the same time. So if you look at the August calendar, I mean, yeah, kind of like right there at the beginning of the month, somewhere in that sort of, very, first week of August. By then, they will be rocking and rolling by then. And it's kind of a floating date. It's a little bit different each and every year. But by that first week in August, they'll be kind of up and rolling and going. And if I had to guess, you might get that first, because I sort of think about this from a media standpoint. And by the way, are we on the other platforms now? Good morning. Not quite yet. Okay. If I had to guess, you'd probably get that first press conference. That's always kind of the media thing here, introductory press conference to start the season. You might get that somewhere around that Wednesday, Thursday, August 3rd, August 4th, somewhere around the middle of that week that might go down. But that first week of August is basically when Georgia will be doing that. Sometimes it's like July 30th, and sometimes it can be a little later than that. But one way or another, around that first week of August, they're going to be up and running there. And I'd say, we'll hear from Kirby probably 3rd, 4th, if I had to guess. But that is just a guess. A slightly educated guess, maybe, but just a guess. By the way, good morning, everybody else. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We have a very busy show. Georgia got a big commitment yesterday. We're going to celebrate Todd Harley, his position coach, for that. We'll talk about everything else going on with UGA recruiting today. A lot of recruiting stuff on the show today. And Jeff Sintel stops by, too, and that's always a really good thing there as well. Let me take a couple more comments, though, if you don't mind. It's part of our 1st and 15 before we get rolling. Dogs Only says, just wondering if all it takes is NIL to get an unproven player at the college level. How good of a team player is he going to be? I think it's a fair question. And listen, I think there's room for some nuance in all this because, there are very few people that comment to our shows that say players shouldn't be paid. There's just not much of that happens. And like I'm someone who's probably thought to be a traditionalist with good reason. But even me, I don't care about players getting money. Frankly, I don't care about players getting money in kind of the NIL world that we live in now. The allegations of under-the-table payments from years past, I'm not that scandalized by that. I just don't care. I don't really count other people's money very much. It's just not something that's I'm worried about my own money. I'm not that worried about other people's money very much. So I'm not scandalized by players getting money now, or maybe when they've gotten money in the past. It's just not that big a concern for me necessarily. But I do think the NIL age in which we live is going to be very similar to previous eras in college football. In a sport that's as big as college football is, there are just a lot of teams that compete. There are only 32 NFL teams. There are, 60, 70 teams that kind of play at the Power 5 level. There are 130 teams at kind of the FBS level of the sport. This is a sport that's very large in terms of the number of teams in the sport, the number of ways that the sport is approached. And I think the NIL approaches will kind of resemble that there too. There will be some programs, and you commonly think of Miami being one of these, or Texas A&M being one of these, maybe Texas now being one of these, where they are leading with NIL in terms of their recruiting approach. And that's a strategy. It's a valid mechanism for trying to acquire talent. But I don't necessarily think that's the only way you can do that. The same way for a long time, college football teams have approached success from very different vantage points. And I think NIL is going to be kind of the same way. It is probably true that you can't completely ignore NIL and expect to be competitive at the highest level. That's certainly probably true. But the chasm between, hey, we lead with NIL, it's our number one recruiting pitch, which seemingly a couple of schools are doing, and we're not sort of acknowledging the validity of NIL whatsoever. In between those two extremes, there's an entire chasm of potential viewpoints in all of this, and I would suggest that a slower, more methodical approach can still work. It's working for Georgia. Georgia's putting together an elite class. Now, that may not get so-and-so player, but when it's all said and done, I too truly believe the 2023 UGA recruiting class is going to look pretty similar in overall credentials to the other recruiting classes that Kirby Smart's produced there in recent years. And I think there's a long arc to the story of how NIL is going to play out. And there's a lot of what you're seeing now that almost resembles like a financial market bubble, internet bubble, housing bubble. When you see the aggressive nature that some people seem to be sort of pushing funds into the NIL stuff, does this look like a little bit like, some of the, I wouldn't even get into some of the crypto stuff, whatever else, but there's definitely, kind of a front end aggression here that kind of reminds you of some of the things you've seen in some other markets before there as well. DT. Yeah, that's funny. He says, I got my mind on my money on my mind, and not anybody else's. Yeah, that's pretty much the rule that I live by. Listen, I got enough on my plate just trying to figure out how to get more money in my pocket. Worrying about what somebody else's money in their pocket is, I just don't have time for that all that much. For sure. Hemingway says, I support players getting money, but getting money to sign might be a problem. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, like the only thing, I will say is that I do think some of the figures that you've heard thrown around are exaggerated. I do. I think, first of all, I think some of the reason why some of these figures are so exaggerated is because the source for these figures are, I believe, in some cases, unscrupulous people. And I think that a lot of media types run with those exaggerated figures because it makes their story sound better. Like everybody has got an incentive, and ultimately everything in life comes down to incentivized behavior. And in the NIL world, everybody seemingly has an incentive to exaggerate all of this. The reporter who reports the story has an incentive to report the exaggerated story because it makes his headline look better. The, handler, agent, whatever you want to call it, for the player has a motivation to want to exaggerate this because it makes him seem more important to the process. He got more money for the player. The program benefits by the exaggerated NIL claim because it makes it seem like they're throwing around a bunch of money. The player benefits from the exaggerated NIL claim because it makes him seem like he's worth that much money, ego stroke. There's a huge incentive that comes the way of the exaggerated NIL claim. But even if you cut some of these numbers by, 10, cut them into 10 pieces, even if the ultimate number is 1/10 of what it's been reported to be, that's still kind of a lot of money in some cases. And so that's the reality of the situation. But it does set up a fascinating conversation, one that's ongoing here each and every day. Diedrich Frazier says the NIL craze is going to slow down in 2 or 3 years when players don't play early or meet expectations. I think there's definitely, if I had to guess, going to be a market correction coming because there's typically a market correction in a lot of new markets. How many of you did NBA Top Shot? How many of you have gotten involved in some of these NFT collectibles? How many of you go on and on with a lot of this kind of stuff that the NIL market, doesn't look all that different than some other markets kind of do, but that's probably a different topic for a different day. Jacob Yarborough says all this hype around Tennessee this year. UGA fans should have confidence in knowing that Kirby will have the guys ready for that game come November in Athens. I think that's probably true. I think it does help Georgia to have that game in Athens. Georgia also handled Tennessee pretty effectively last year. I do think there's a little bit of interesting chatter around Tennessee, though. I've told you before, if you care about, speaking of markets, if you care about gambling markets, things like that, there are a lot of gamblers that kind of like Tennessee here a little bit this year. Not to the tune of being a threat to Georgia, but to the tune of being a pretty dangerous team. We said on yesterday's show, like, if you follow this stuff kind of closely, who do you think's better this year, Tennessee or LSU? I'd probably lean towards Tennessee on that. Who do you think's better this year, Tennessee or Florida? I'd probably lean towards Tennessee on that. When you start making some kind of comparisons here within the league, I think it's probably likely that Tennessee finishes the year in the top 25, if I had to guess. That means on the other side of a beatdown of Georgia, by Georgia, and I do believe that's going to take place. I think that Georgia handles Tennessee probably pretty easily in Athens. But on the other side of that, Tennessee's probably still a top 25 team, which means they probably have a good bit of steam maybe coming into Athens. In other words, one of the things that you've kind of commonly seen out there from some people is the notion that maybe Tennessee could play Alabama close in Neyland Stadium third Saturday in October. By the way, it is really late. We got to start the show. Gosh, we're running crazy late. I've gone a little bit too long with comments here. So that's one to watch. Like, I don't think anybody expects Tennessee to beat Alabama, but could they play them close third Saturday in October? That'd be a pretty big statement about maybe where Josh Heupel's taking that program. Baggins says he's had a little bit of issue on YouTube. Michael, can we check that? Is there any kind of issue on YouTube? Let's see if I can pull this up real quick before we start the show. Let us see here on the Dog Nation YouTube page. No, I see we're on YouTube. We're on YouTube. Yeah, so I'm looking at this YouTube right now. I'm actually looking at myself This is like Inception. I'm looking at myself on YouTube as I speak. Yeah, just refresh the page. You should be good there on that. So, Foster Moss says YouTube is fine. So we'll be back at YouTube for comments later on. But we've got a show to do. It's 10:11. We haven't started yet. All right, so let's do this. A lot of recruiting. Jeff Sintel. Big news yesterday with the class of 2024. Landon Thomas is a good-looking tight end. Georgia got themselves a good one there. And we'll address that, plus some concerns that maybe some UGA fans have. It may sound like we're doing a what's wrong with the Georgia recruiting, but we're not. We'll do all of that. And we'll remind you one more time, while you still can, how to get involved with the Dog Nation Duck Hunt. Big tailgate celebration to kick off the season in downtown Atlanta on September 3rd. It is all on the way as Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of Dog Nation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DogNation.com. This is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Boy, big news for Georgia yesterday. Another great tight end brought into the fold, and this is certainly one that got a lot of attention from UGA fans because it kind of comes on the heels of another piece of good news for Georgia in that 2024 class this week with Nye Carr, the wide receiver, made his announcement. Carr, of course, goes to Colquitt County High School, and one of the things that was sort of immediately connected to the Carr news was, hey, maybe that helps Georgia with Landon Thomas, the tight end. And Carr, we even talked about this on yesterday's show during Around the Doghouse. Carr was on social media kind of making that push for Thomas to commit. Carr had sort of projected July 11th being the date when that might happen. We said there was no real confirmation of what that date might mean, and come to find out, we didn't even have to wait until the 11th to get Landon Thomas in the fold. He makes his pledge to Georgia yesterday. I'll show you on the screen if you're watching on video how he put it out there on social media. And I really like this edit. I like the font there for the word committed. I mean, I never get tired of seeing the national championship trophy and this kind of stuff. That's good to see. Another tight end at Georgia maybe wearing that number 0. Another big O on the way for the Dogs at the tight end spot. You don't mind that either. Harry Dog and Uga on that too. That's a sharp-looking edit. A pretty good celebration for Landon Thomas there committing to UGA. And speaking of celebrations, not to be outdone by that was the stuff of Todd Harley yesterday too, the Georgia tight ends coach. And if anybody has earned the right to take a bow for the work that he's been doing, I mean, keep in mind here, Hartley's success in recruiting and all the 5 stars and elite level prospects that he brings in is even made more remarkable given the fact that the tight end position is a position, it's not like offensive line or defensive back or something like that, where you're recruiting a huge number of players each and every year. For the most part, you're going after maybe 1 or 2 guys. The number of guys you're even targeting is relatively small. And the fact that Hartley keeps hitting on these dudes makes it all the more impressive. He had a great gift celebration on social media yesterday. Once again, for the video folks, I'll show this to you. It's kind of the Aaron Rodgers championship belt type deal, and what makes that seem more fun. We can show that one more time. We can have a little bit more fun with that. What makes that even better to understand is that Thomas and Nye Carr play for Colquitt County. Colquitt County is the Packers. So when Hartley says "Go Pack, go" there with his Aaron Rodgers style celebration, that's a little bit of a nod and homage to the fact that Thomas plays down there in Moultrie for the Packers, and they got that cool Packers name on the side of those helmets down there in Colquitt County. So that's a little bit of an homage to the high school team for Landon Thomas in celebration. And Hartley was also having some fun yesterday too. I feel like we've kind of shown all these photos when they've come out. This is the time of year in which there's always a lot of fellowship going on with the position coaches, having their players, at the house for the pool party or the cookout, whatever it is. And you want like photographic evidence for how impressive the tight end room is for Georgia. Hartley showed that to you with kind of all these guys, there at the same time, having a good time. And obviously, when you really look at all that talent at the same place, you're just left to acknowledge just how impressive it all is. And Hartley's tweet says, "Today was a good day," Ice Cube voice, of course, "for our tight end tough family, for the present and the future." He says tight end tough's more than just a saying. It's a feeling. It's a connection. It's truly a selfless relationship that promotes a brotherhood that will last a lifetime. And that's great to see. Hartley's got his own family there and his tight end tough family there too. And we said yesterday that some of this kind of stuff, it kind of feels like coach speak sometimes. Maybe it comes across a little bit corny to certain people at certain points, but I don't think that it should, that you do create that special bond from time to time. It is not easy to get all these talented players to want to play together, to be in the same room together. But when they see the success that each one is either having or has the potential to have, it becomes its own sense of validation of, hey, just by even being in this group, just by even being, at that, in this sort of space in the same time, these other great tight ends, it sort of says something about me as a tight end, about how good I can be if you're one of those guys. And I think it's just really interesting how the success that Georgia's having is seemingly propelling it to even more success here. One of the guys that's in that picture that you just saw there is obviously Brock Bowers, who had great success for Georgia last season, one of the most prolific pass catchers that Georgia's had in a good number of years for any position, wide receiver, tight end, whatever else. The fact that he's a tight end makes it all the more interesting. And you have to assume that there are people who are in that room because of the success that Bowers had. And in fact, we know Oscar Delp's an example of that. We've heard Delp say it a good number of times, is that when it came down to where I want to be to go to school, obviously Delp had a lot of family ties to the University of South Carolina. Shane Beamer, who is a good recruiter, put a lot of emphasis on trying to recruit Oscar Delp. But ultimately, Delp chose Georgia, even though the Georgia tight end room is more crowded. And, even though the path to success there may be a little bit more challenging because it's not as wide open as it would be at South Carolina, ultimately Delp said Georgia's the right place to, for me. Todd Harley is a big reason for that. But it's not just the promise of what this could be. I mean, and this is what's really important, is that for a long time, Georgia was having to sell a vision when it comes to pass-catching targets. And when it came to Eric Gilbert the first time around, when Gilbert was a recruit coming out of Marietta High School, the idea of buying into that vision and trusting Georgia to deliver those numbers for him, that was just something that he didn't quite see the vision of. He didn't quite believe in that vision, you're led to believe, because he chose LSU the first time around instead of coming to UGA. The fact that Gilbert later transferred to UGA, I think, is an example of the fact that tight end position started to kind of show what it truly could be. And all of a sudden now, when you've got Bowers having the kind of season that he had, the success that he enjoyed last season, all of a sudden, if you're Oscar Delp for the class of 2022, or if you're Landon Thomas the class of 2024, all of a sudden now it's not, hey, come here and we'll use you. It's, hey, come here and you can be used exactly like we're already using tight ends. You don't have to use your imagination. You don't have to be sold on a vision. You can be sold on tangible accomplishments taking place. And that right now, as much as anything, explains why Georgia is able to win with a tight end like Thomas or a tight end like Delp the way they did for the last recruiting cycle. In fact, Delp told Jeff Sentell basically that. You want to know why Georgia's having so much success with tight ends right now? Why that tight end room standing around Todd Harley during a pool party just looks so robust with guys like Darnell Washington, Eric Gilbert, and everybody else? Let the words of Oscar Delp, one of the tight ends in that room, be your guide for that. This is what he said about why he committed to UGA.
I mean, it really just came down to where I'm going to get developed the most and have the best opportunity to make a name for myself and really kind of get the ball. And I think that Georgia has developed offensive line, developed defense, and every week in practice I'm really going to be getting reps against the best players in the country, and I think it's really going to make me a better player in the long run. And I love what they're doing with Bowers so far this year, and how they're going to use us together in the future, I think is really going to be a cool thing.
I mean, that's it right there. That's a guy, Oscar Delp. I'm not saying he doesn't have an imagination. I'm saying he doesn't have to use his imagination to figure out how he fits into a place like Georgia. Come here and do exactly what Brock Bowers is doing. That's what Todd Harley is able to say. Hey, me and Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator, we are creating success for our tight ends, and you can be the next one on that. And Landon Thomas can be the next one after that, and on and on and on. The cycle can go as long as these guys stay there at UGA. Todd Harley deservedly taking a bow and enjoying some success here today, as he certainly should. Now, here's what all this leads me to, though. I believe that the success that the Georgia tight end room has enjoyed in terms of on-field stuff and the recruiting stuff, maybe it's only just getting started. I do truly believe that better results are in store for the players here this upcoming season than a year ago. Not just because Eric Gilbert's playing this year and he wasn't before, but a guy like Brock Bowers, who was such a breakthrough as a freshman. I mean, imagine what could be in store for him here in the 2022 season there as well. I mean, I saw where Trevor Sickman, do you know who that is? That's the guy from Pro Football Focus. I saw the other day where he said something to the effect of, had Bowers been in the most recent NFL draft, had he been in the 2022 NFL draft, he would have been the first tight end taken. And maybe that is the case. I know not everybody loves Pro Football Focus, but maybe Sickman is right about that. Maybe that's how coveted Bowers would have been as a very young person in this most recent NFL draft if he was there. But let's just take that at face value here for a moment. You also very commonly see Eric Gilbert mentioned as like a high first-round pick for this upcoming year because of how talented he is as a tight end. That's the kind of sort of future NFL talent that currently exists at Georgia. So the robust statistic this room produced a year ago, my assumption is it's even better for this upcoming season. Take a guy like Bowers in particular here. I mean, we know that Georgia in the entire history of the program has only had 1,000-yard receiver. It's our buddy Terrence Edwards. You have to go all the way back to 2002 even for that. So not only has Georgia only had one of them, the one example of a 1,000-yard receiver is darn near 20 years ago. It's crazy to think about, just how little of that kind of success that Georgia has had. But I think it's time this year for that to change. And I think it needs to change with Brock Bowers. And we had our buddy Connor Riley on the show going back to the 4th of July. And Connor thought that, hey, maybe even matching the numbers that Bowers had a year ago might be hard for Georgia to do. He predicted that a guy like Kearis Jackson might be UGA's leading receiver. Well, no disrespect to Kearis and any other wide receivers, but that's not what needs to be the case for Georgia this year. Bowers proved himself to be a very special player last year, and taking the next step is, to me, the most appropriate thing here. Bowers going on to kind of break through what has been a little bit of a glass ceiling for Georgia in terms of those 1,000-yard receivers. And then after that, maybe it's another tight end working along with him and Eric Gilbert, or maybe that opens up doors for some of the wide receivers there as well. But that's what's fun to think about. Georgia got another big recruiting win yesterday at the tight end spot. It's Landon Thomas, following the footsteps of Oscar Delp, who came in for the class of 2022, and his reason for doing so, saying, because I see how Brock Bowers is being used. Well, guess what? We may see Brock Bowers used to an entirely different level this year, even more production this year than he had a year ago, truly one of the best pass catchers in the SEC, regardless of position. And maybe it's true for Eric Gilbert or maybe whatever else, but the tight end success that Georgia's enjoyed, as we look to the horizon here for 2022, maybe that success is only just getting started. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We also start at 9:45 there on DogNation.com and on the Dog Nation app. We're available all kinds of podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, the Google Play. There's a bunch of podcast things I haven't even heard of. We're on those there, too. I don't quite know how we get there, but somehow we do. The point is, it's very easy to listen to the show as a podcast, and if you're in the Classic City there in Athens, you can catch us on the radio there, too, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We air each and every day at noon, and I love being able to do that, and I am so thankful for our friends at Kroger who make it all possible. We could not do this show on a day like this if it wasn't for Kroger doing it for us, so that is really great. And I'm actually really excited to tell you that something we've told you about before, but haven't told you about in a while, doesn't seem like it. Well, now it's back. I'm talking about Kroger Chef Jr. Summer planning, summer fun with your kids. Kroger Chef Jr. should definitely be on your list. It's a guided kids cooking experience. It sort of teaches them how to cook, and they're kind of in there doing that with the Kroger Chef as all of this is going down. And there are a couple of opportunities to take advantage of that here this month, including July 16th and July 30th at select Kroger locations. So it's a 30-minute class. Your kid is going to go and get an apron and a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card, and a box, and a spatula, all for just $7 per child. That's a really good deal, right? And it's a veggie dip that's being made here this month, which is kind of a fun thing there, too, eating healthy and all that kind of stuff. And what I really find is when my kids are part of the food preparation, they're a little bit more excited to eat the food. So, getting excited about eating a veggie dip or something like that, when they're the ones that are actually out there working on that, makes them more excited about eating it. So it's another reason to recommend Kroger Chef Jr. Our buddy Michael Carvel, our producer, who's very accomplished in the kitchen, he agrees with that there as well. So all kinds of cool stuff. As I told you before, it's an apron, a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card, and a recipe box, and a spatula just for $7 a child. Now, check out the website. It's KrogerChefJr.com. Now, understand this. The word junior is spelled out. Kroger Chef Jr., Junior, KrogerChefJr.com for a lot more details on that. We're going to get Jeff Sintel and do some UGA recruiting with Jeff here in just a moment. I'm excited about that. There's actually a lot to cover with Jeff, in addition to the Landon Thomas news from yesterday, a bunch of other stuff to do related to Jeff on the road, assisted by AAA with him. Before that, though, let me do a couple of things. First of all, thank you. Huge response yesterday to our Dog Nation Duck Hunt tailgate to kick out the 2022 season there at the Home Depot backyard right next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium before Georgia takes on Oregon. We knew we were going to have a heavy response to this. We got one yesterday. So let me do a couple of things here. Let me welcome in a couple of new sponsors to our discussion here on this. Great to have our friends at 7-6 Apparel. I've been a personal fan of 7-6 Apparel for a long time, and now happy to have them on board what we're doing here at Dog Nation. So congratulations to 7-6 Apparel for hopping in here for us, and it's very exciting for me to have them on board for all this there as well. You know you're going to have a great T-shirt for this event if you've got 7-6 Apparel in on that. They've done some really cool stuff for a long time. I've been a personal fan and now happy to have them here as a part of what we're doing at Dog Nation. And our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, too. And you know how much I love the whole gang over there at Merriweather and Tharp. Had a great lunch yesterday with Bob Tharp. Had a nice Marlowe's Tavern lunch, if you must know. We had a good time there on that. And really fun to have Merriweather and Tharp on board for this there as well. And it's these great sponsors who help us keep the price so low for what we're doing here. Kroger, R.S. Andrews, The Finished Long Drink, 7-6 Apparel, Merriweather and Tharp for our Dog Nation Duck Hunt tailgates, noon to 3 p.m. there that day before kickoff. Kickoff, of course, being 3:30. So the tailgate itself goes from noon to 3. Could not be closer to the stadium, right there in the Home Depot backyard next to Mercedes-Benz. The price gets you your food, your drink tickets, and your T-shirt. There's all kinds of fun going on there with the event there, too. So please go to DogNation.com. Just go to DogNation.com. Right there at the top of the page. It could not be easier to find. This is one of the best logos we've ever had for all of this. I'm really, really proud of all of that. And so the Dog Nation Duck Hunt logo, easy to find when you go to DogNation.com. Get in there and get these. I'd say by next week they're probably gone. Could sell out over the weekend. So if you're, dragging your feet at all, jump in there, go ahead and get them and be a part of this with us. It's going to be one of the biggest events we've done. Certainly a great way to kick off the 2022 season that is on its way. So DogNation.com, be a part of the Dog Nation Duck Hunt, big tailgate celebration to kick off the 2022 season. And a big thanks for Kroger, R.S. Andrews, The Finished Long Drink, 7-6 Apparel, and Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce, making all of that possible. All right, so before we get Jeff Sintel, let us do a quick version around the Doghouse. And I'm running a little bit late today because that's just what we do sometimes. So I'll see if I can pick up the pace here a little bit. Now, as we go around the Doghouse, to the untrained ear, this is going to sound like I am doing something that I made fun of a little earlier this week, but hopefully this is not quite that. Earlier this week we kind of mocked the idea of what's wrong with UGA recruiting, a question that seems to be asked virtually every summer, only to be emphatically answered by the end of the recruiting cycle that nothing is wrong with UGA recruiting. Everything's just fine. Georgia once again produces an elite class. But somehow every summer there seems to be this sort of justified reason to sort of stop and pause and say, hey, are we sure everything's okay here? Are we sure that Georgia's kind of humming along the way that it's supposed to? And I'm going to give you an example of not a what's wrong with UGA recruiting topic. That's not what this is. But hey, let's pay attention to this issue to see how it resolves itself. And I don't know that it's crisis level. I don't know that it's cause for panic. It's certainly not cause for alarm, but it's worth paying attention to a little bit. Let's talk about Shomarad Umarov here for a moment. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but certainly not doing it intentionally. A good-looking offensive line prospect out of Denmark High School, kind of an up-and-coming program there in Forsyth County. Umarov is going to make his announcement at 3 p.m. today. He's choosing from a list of 4 finalists. Let me show you these on the screen. Michigan State, Georgia, LSU, Tennessee. It seems like the internet sort of thinks that Umarov is not choosing Georgia, likely maybe choosing the Vols. That seems to be what the internet chatter is. That's not my news to break. I'm just kind of going from what I've sort of seen people saying online there when it comes to that. And This kind of goes into a little bit of a trend maybe lately where you had Requez McElderry decommit from Georgia last week, quickly committed to Alabama. There's been a little bit of chatter lately about TJ Shanahan, a good-looking offensive line prospect out of the state of Texas, maybe trending towards Texas A&M. And it does sort of leave you with a little bit of kind of interesting here. Georgia, when it comes to its offensive line targets, maybe not collecting all of those the way that you want to. And you're kind of reminded in the class of 2022 that it's sort of a late win for an Ernest Green kind of kept that offensive line group from certainly looking less than what you're used to seeing Georgia do at all positions, but at offensive line in particular, where Georgia's had so much success as of late. The Ernest Green commitment last year kind of prevented that offensive line grouping from the class of 2022 from certainly looking less than what you're used to from UGA. And all of a sudden now here in the class of 2023, you love Bo Hughley, and I think you certainly should. We've said before that if Hughley committed today, it'd be celebrated as gigantic news. The fact that he's been committed so long shouldn't lessen the value that Hughley seems to bring in. And there's obviously other big recruiting wins that Georgia has a chance to get. Monroe Freeling, for example, is an offensive lineman that Stacey Searles, the offensive line coach at UGA, seems to have a really good relationship with. Now, Freeling's also considering a lot of other programs there too, but it seems like Georgia's maybe in a pretty good spot with him. But on the heels of an offensive lineman today having Georgia in his top four, but maybe not committing to Georgia, at least if you're kind of led to believe the internet chatter and you see other example of other targets kind of moving in the other direction, I do think offensive line recruiting gets into a little bit of a spotlight here in terms of what it might mean for the Dogs going forward. And I'm going to ask Jeff Sentell here coming up in a moment of, exactly what's going on there. Is there some reason for concern? Is there a thought here that maybe Georgia's missing on some of its top targets for its offensive line spots? And, kind of how do you square all of this with everything else that's going on there with UGA recruiting? There's plenty of good things happening with Georgia, of course. But the offensive line is probably one of those spots where I do think there are some justified questions to be asked. So what do you say we ask those right now as we also celebrate some good news for Landon Thomas and really a couple of nice pieces of news for the 2024 class this week. So a lot of ground to cover. Let's do it all right now. We call it On the Road, assisted by AAA, as Jeff Sentell's been hot on the recruiting trail as of late, collecting all kinds of information, which he'll share with us right now here on Dog Nation Daily. Glad to have him and all of you with us here today as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DogNation.com insider.
So we're bringing Jeff Sentell here. A lot to do with him, including we'll get to really good news the 2024 class here over the course of the last couple of days. Landon Thomas yesterday, Nikar before that. Fun to think that Georgia's planted such a flag down there in Moultrie with both those guys. But, Jeff, if you don't mind, as we go on the road assisted by AAA, let me bring you into the conversation I was just having a moment ago. Good-looking offensive line prospect out of Denmark High School, going to make a pledge today. Georgia among the finalists, but probably not, at least if I'm judging the internet as a guy here, going to win on that one with Shimon Umaroff. And, you got the recent chatter about TJ Shanahan, maybe kind of trending towards Texas A&M, the Requez McElderry decommitment, and then flipping to Alabama pretty quickly on that. This sounds like what's wrong with UGA recruiting, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. But I do think the offensive line is kind of a position in a little bit of a spotlight here in the class of 2023, just kind of based on some of the events of the last couple of cycles. What do you make of the current state of UGA's offensive line recruiting? And I should also point out, it had a very good story this week involving one of those targets in Kelton Smith. But what do you make of the current state of Georgia's offensive line recruiting?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I think that's a good place to start because, what is it, Brandon? The further away Georgia gets from the revered Sam Pittman, the more people wonder if it's still going to be that same Great Wall of Georgia. Matt Luke had his own way of doing things. I think Stacey Searles has his own unique way. Even when Pittman and Luke were bringing in 5-stars and All-Americans left and right, some people would look at the on-field play and they're like, how come Georgia can't get a 3rd and 1? How come Georgia can't get a 4th and 1? I think that's the A1A expertise there for Stacey Searles. I think he's going to maybe his best recruiting tactics or his best recruiting facets on the gym here are going to be what he does with his guys on the field. He's got the respect of everybody that is in his room right now. But for for Searles, he's a guy that everybody's going to be looking at him. They're going to look at his track record. They're going to wonder, are these connected? Are these related? I think with Georgia, and this is why, Brandon, forgive me, I'm going to try to roll the volume up a little bit on a little bit of the concern here. Normally I'm not a guy that rolls it down, but I think this 2023 cycle has to be important, Brandon. I think there are tackles out there. I still think Bo Hughley is going to wind up in the class. He kind of gives one of the most interesting back and forth, up and down interviews around in the 2023 class. But he still sounds like he knows that Georgia is home. He has deep roots there. He just told me recently that he's just ready to go ahead and sign, man, get all this talking season over with. But the reason why I say that this is so important, Brandon, is let's look back to the 2022 class. And I think Georgia's room is so stacked, and it's been so stacked by Luke of late and Pittman before him that in my opinion, that are not likely to see the field for at least 2 years. A lot of guys that were those 3-star giants, Jacob Hood, 6'8", a lot of guys that you're like, okay, those guys aren't likely to help Georgia in the 2022 season, except for maybe Ernest Green III. I think Ernest Green III is when we talk about all these freshmen, hot shots and guys to watch. I think EG3, we saw him in spring, Brandon. He was already getting second team reps at like left tackle and right tackle. So he was the one that if you need to have a quick guy to rise up the depth chart really quick, I think that's what Ernest Green III gave Georgia in the last cycle. Now, this cycle heightens the awareness of Georgia's got to get a guy or two that can come in and play. You see what Georgia's doing. You see what Stacey Searles is doing. They're wanting to get a lot of these adaptable guard/tackles, meaning that they're adept enough with great enough feet in order to play the tackle, but maybe would be a really stinking good, really masher type all-around incredible guard. That's what we've seen a lot with some tweeners that maybe aren't 6'7" or whatever. I think that's what's important. I think I think the ideal offensive line class for Georgia still feels like at least 2 tackles, maybe two tier tackles. Maybe a name like Monroe Freeling is a guy you think about, that young man from Charleston who visited over the summer. You've got Bo Hughley there, and then you've got guys like Kelton Smith, already what you got going on in that class. He's been back and forth about whether he wants to decide on July 22nd or not. And, Kelton is a guy, I thought Rockwez McElderry was a fantastic prospect. He's way above his rankings. But you've got a guy that they've targeted in state out of Carver Columbus High School. And this is a 4-star, not a 3-star like McElderry. And he's a top 260 level prospect. When you talk about offensive linemen in that wheelhouse right there, you're talking about one of the best offensive line prospects in the country. I think everybody's just going to want to see Georgia hit a couple of bigger names in the 2023 class to kind of just offset maybe all the great things that they didn't do with instant players and those top 100 guys in the 2022 class. I think that's why it's so important, Brandon, for Georgia to really get some name guys. And when I mean not just name guys that look good at star rankings, but guys that you just look at and say that guy can come in and play fast at Georgia.
Yeah, I get the impression, you mentioned Monroe Freeling. I get the impression that Freeling might be this year's version of Ernest Green, and that I mentioned this before you joined us of, hey, if you don't get Ernest Green for the class of 2022, that offensive line room looks, a little different, but you did get him. You won that recruiting battle. You added the elite offensive lineman there relatively late in the process, and Freeling could be the example of that right now. My understanding is, I guess Stacey Searles had a relationship with Freeling prior to maybe coming to UGA, had been recruiting him before, so kind of, sort of knows him pretty well. And I guess there's also some thought that Miami's in on Freeling right now, so there's clearly a battle to be had there. But that's the example of the sort of top 100 level prospect that if Georgia brings in a Freeling to go along with a Bo Hughley, then all of a sudden the offensive line room, it sort of still feels like you got the number of elite players that you need. But if Freeling were to go elsewhere, then all of a sudden it does put a larger spotlight on whether it's Shanahan or McElderry or whatever else, the guys you didn't get, right?
Yeah, and I think we got to remember also really good reports I've heard so far about Doogie Miller, Joshua Miller. He's also committed to Georgia, really strongly committed to Georgia. I love the line that Bo Hughley had for him when he was telling me about what he knows about Joshua Miller. That's the recent Penn State flip, which he basically said, man, I like him. We can hang out. I can hang out with anybody, Jeff, but man, that guy's mean. he's really mean. And when you've got a contemporary offensive lineman calling another guy really mean, that's good news. That's kind of like the type of stuff that most people would be here for. And then you wonder about the U. You know, Miami just locked up the nation's #1 offensive tackle this past week in Francis Mauga out of IMG Academy. So, you know, there you go with Miami getting their pristine 5-star. And it seems like, Brennan, their NIL coffers are flush these days, kind of like the sands of South Beach right now. So with Georgia, I think offensive line is always going to be a bedrock of the program. They just still, Brennan, you think about names like Chad Lindbergh still there. You think about names like Devin Willick and Xavier Truss, and, you know, you throw Ernest Green III in there as well. You got Austin Blasky, Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson,
yeah.
Brandon. You know, everybody's wondering about that room, but those names I just mentioned right there, Brandon, those are the 2023 guys, not just the 2022 guys for Stacey's room, Coach Cyril's room at Georgia. And it's a problem now, not a problem, where people are wondering about the 2023 OLs, because literally I think even Kelton Smith had it right when he said, man, I want to play right away. I want to go somewhere I can play right away. He said, they're telling me at LSU I can play right away. They're telling me at Texas A&M I can play right away. But he's like, at least I want to get on the field by my sophomore year at Georgia. So even he understands that Georgia's loaded at offensive line still, and yet he still has them on top for a lot of more reasons besides an easy path to playing time.
Let's be candid about this, Jeff. It's never as easy to get folks interested in 2024 commitments as it is to get folks interested in commits for the current cycle. Anything more than a year away just sometimes kind of sort of goes in one ear and out the other with some of our audience. That's just being honest here for a moment. But in the case of Landon Thomas, in the case of Carr, Jeff, these are very impressive prospects. You know, Carr is an example of the kind of sort of top 10 receiver, you know, easy top 100 recruit, you know, 60th something ranked, whatever he is. This is the example of the kind of receiver Georgia has not been getting, and he seems to really like UGA. Your story earlier this week certainly kind of laid out all of that. Thomas is obviously the exact kind of tight end that Todd Harley always seems to be winning with. You know, I know this is more than a year before these guys get here, but these were massive recruiting wins for Georgia this week. I don't think it can be overstated just how big it was to go down there to Moultrie and bring both these folks back to Georgia.
Brandon, I'm going to say two things that hopefully maybe we can get this as a segment with one day with a zoom in on Brandon as I say this, one of those eyebrow raising takes right here, Brandon. Number one, I think when we look back at the month of July, which is going to be a ginormous month for recruiting for Georgia, I'm going to say when you look back and you rank the top, I want to say 8 commitments that Georgia might get in the month of July, I think that both Carr and Landon Thomas will go into that mix of the top 8. That's how stinking good they are.
Yeah, I believe.
And I know you're very professorial when you say, man, folks aren't going to get excited about no 2024s. Probably need to, stay off the brakes with these 2024s, because not only are they teammates, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my reporter life. Brandon, Carr wanted to be a Bulldog so stinking bad that he didn't wait on an edit. He didn't wait on a video.
Yeah.
All he did was tweet out and say, I'm committed to the University of Georgia. I'm home. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you listening. Brandon, that never happens anymore. Do you understand how that never happens anymore? The young man just tweets it out. No ceremony, no hat, no video, no edit, no nothing. And that's the kind of players, it's that down south Georgia boy mentality that everybody loves to see. And I got one more for you, Brandon. I want you to sit here and think about the class of 2024. And if this doesn't get your jalapeno peppers popping, I don't know what will. Brandon, right now, and some of it's early because Georgia gets evaluated more because there's so many recruiting analysts in the state of Georgia. But there are currently 23 prospects. I believe I have that right. 18. I think it's 18. There are 18 prospects, Brandon, in the state of Georgia that are part of the nation's top 133 players. 18 of those are from the state of Georgia, Brandon. That's almost 1/6 of the entire country's top 133. Those guys are from the state of Georgia. And I'm going to say this. Georgia currently has 2. I think they get at least 5 more out of those 18. That's how strong, that's how stout the Peach State is going to be with dog love, I feel like right now in the class of 2024.
And so for some context on that, that's far more than the class of 2023, right? I mean, the class of, I'm not disparaging the players, of course, but the class of 2023 in comparison to how deep Georgia sometimes is, the state of Georgia sometimes is, probably a little less so this year. It sounds like in 2024, that's definitely a much different scenario where maybe the state of Georgia is as deep as it has been. So it sounds like the overall depth of talent in our state for the class of 2024 maybe a little heftier than it currently is for the current cycle. Is that a fair read on that situation?
Yeah, Brandon, it's kind of funny. You know, I've been doing this a lot of years now, and I look at all these players in 2024 and I see how highly they're rated. And part of me just has to just kind of be real with folks, because I think of the 2017 players in the state of Georgia. I think of the 2019 players in the state of Georgia, and I go, hold on. These boys right here, they're not as good as that group of 2017s, 2019s, and everything like that in the state. That said, they're pretty good. They're really good. And Brandon, to answer your question, pinpoint here, I think a great year for the state of Georgia would be to have 10, 12 out of the nation's top 133, and much less 18 right now, and 2 already committed. I mean, Brendan, there's some sites that have Nikar as the nation's number 34 overall prospect. He goes all the way up to 66. Let me give you a little tease of what's coming today on DogNation.com. Nikar is a guy, and you'll love this, Brendan, because I know you look at receivers and you go 6 feet. I want that go get him guy. Now he's explosive. He's going to stretch the vertical. He's going to stretch to take the top off the defense, make people respect the run game. But when you see Nikar, Brandon, he looks like, you remember those old Mr. Potato Head things where you can take the arms off and put the arms back on and you can kind of switch in and switch out?
Yeah.
Nikar, man, looks like somebody put a 6'3" or 6'4" dude's arms on a 6-foot slot receiver's body. His hands are gigantic. He's a slot receiver that looks like he's got go-go gadget arms, if you want to say it that way. Very impressive with the speed burner and the speed burst, but he's got arms that can go get it. But I thought it was very fitting that, Landon Thomas couldn't wait 2 days afterward. At least he got his edit. And this is the number 1 tight end in the country. This is a 5-star. And those two guys are so different. You learn the stories about Nikar and Brandon. Nikar is like that pit boss, that grill master, that guy that can do anything you want on the grill. Whereas Landon Thomas, man, I don't know if he could make some cereal. These two guys are so different in terms of what they bring to the table off the field, but they're great friends. They want to play together at Georgia. And Nikar, man, was not kidding when he said, there's some other guys that want to come home, and they might come home real soon as well. In the class of 2024, you want to talk about, let's face it, Brandon, every year Georgia's going to be 1, 2, or 3 in recruiting. That's just the way Kirby Smart does it. But there's a lot of guys in the state of Georgia where Georgia's really going to have to do that teeter-totter about out-of-state national recruit versus homegrown talent.
Okay, so along those lines, and I got a lot of stuff I want to cover with you, so let me just get one more thing quickly on this, then we'll move on. When you think about adding playmakers to the class of 2024, your mind quickly goes to, I wonder what quarterback might be throwing to them. So with that in mind, do you think Julian Sayin, the young man out of California right now, is probably ahead of Jaden Davis, the young man out of North Carolina, when it comes to being the consideration for the class of 2024? And if it is Sayin over Davis, how much do you think a guy like Sayin could be swaying, pardon me for that, by the fact that Georgia got these big-time playmakers into the mix here ahead of what might be eventual quarterback commitment?
Yeah, did you just go Sayin could be swaying towards the G? Did you just say that, Brandon?
I wish I hadn't. If I could go back in time and have not said that, I probably would.
Well, I'm going to allow it just because everybody else goes with the clear check down just saying part.
Yeah, right.
When they're trying to make their dad jokes around it, but at least you had a little bit of whip to what you're trying to say right there. And Brandon, he's a guy that I feel like, when you look at Sayin, you got to remember just 1 year as a high school starter, 1 year in a system. He's already very shrewd, Brandon, at these off-platform throws, these off-arm angles, the way he can get rid of the ball. It looks like there's a lot of – this is what we've seen from California quarterbacks for a lot of years now. A lot of Aaron Rodgers influence to his game. He's very accurate. I like the way he moves around in the pocket. And for all pretenses, Brandon, he told me right after the Arch Manning news, because that was one of the first calls I made after the Arch Manning news, kind of where does Georgia go from here? And this would be a guy that if you get him in the class in July, August, September-ish, then that's a guy that can act as your de facto 5-star quarterback recruiter with 2 classes, actually, because they know that there'd be a 5-star quarterback there throwing to them, a marquee guy. Every receiver wants to play with a 5-star quarterback. They want to play with a great 5-star quarterback. So he's a guy that really found it. He was pretty honest, Brendan. He said, man, I was going to make my decision around October. I'm probably going to have to move it up now. And, kind of the industry thinks right now that Julian Sand might make a decision August-ish right there. So that's a guy, should that go Georgia's way, I think that would be a centerpiece you can build a lot of things around in terms of the Georgia class for 2024 and 2023. Accuracy, Brandon, what do we say all the time? If you're not accurate in high school, nobody's going to fix you in college.
Yeah.
There's no way to overhaul the delivery. You got to be accurate. That's one of the things that, quarterbacks, it's got to come in in their wheelhouse, how they're very accurate, much less picking up the system, throwing the ball into tight SEC windows. And, this is a guy, Brandon, he was already very comfortable with Georgia, even prior to the Arch Manning news. And he told me, matter of factly, that he's smart enough that he believes in his own abilities as a competitor, but he probably wasn't going to follow wherever Arch went. And he was a guy, Brandon, was also looking at Georgia and Texas. So maybe the long game there is Arch goes to Texas and maybe Georgia gets the 5-star in 2024 as a cause and effect out of that recruitment.
All right, if I'm not careful, this show is going to be longer than the Batman was. So let me see if I can move a little faster here. We can do these rapid fire here for a moment. Jalen Hale, good-looking wide receiver, has got a top 3. Georgia's in it. Is this anything to take seriously? Do you think that Georgia has a real chance of winning with Jalen Hale, Jeff?
You don't like silver medal talk, right? I think his best visit was Georgia. I think he's got a lot of camaraderie amongst the guys that he took that official visit weekend. But then we're going to look back on that first weekend in June and how Kirby likes to go first and Georgia likes to set the bar with all these officials. We're going to look back at that and wonder if it was as successful as the first weekend of June for the 2022 class. I think there's Jalen. There's staying at home. There's the fact that Arch is now at Texas and he's stacking up some receivers as well. I think ultimately that would be a Georgia-Texas battle. And I want a 2-second answer with you without even thinking. If you would have had to choose Jalen Hale to Georgia and you don't get Arch Manning, would you take a win with that, or would you feel like that's probably when you lost Manning to Texas, you probably weren't going to get Jalen Hale to Georgia?
Yeah, I assume that the aftermath of Manning choosing Texas was going to probably hurt Georgia with some receivers, and Hale's probably as good an example of that as probably any for me.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting about Hakeem Williams and also specifically Tyler Williams in South Florida, I don't know if you saw the tweet from his mother.
I did.
Over the last week. Maybe you've spotlighted it on your quality program. I hope you did. But we had it on Hedges because she basically made the pretenses like, listen, we're not going to no high spitter. We're going to go where we have to get worked and get developed because that's the way we do things here, which was basically a sign that said, NIL, don't play that here. For that family and that household, there's more important things with that recruitment. And even Tyler told me prior to the Arch Manning decision that he's just going to go wherever he goes. He knows there's going to be a great college quarterback there where he can get to the NFL. So that Tyler Williams is the type of recruit Georgia wanted to be in with because his decision wasn't connected and really meshed in together with Arch Manning's decision.
All right, so one more. Troy Bowles, linebacker, puts Georgia in his top 3. This is obviously one that I think a lot of Georgia fans have a good bit of confidence about, and obviously a lot of Georgia fans really like Bowles as a player there as well. Any reason for you to throw water on, I think what a lot of Georgia fans feel pretty good about, the chance that Bowles might end up being a dog?
Yeah, so there's really it's always been kind of like Hale. Hale had always had Georgia really high. Bowles had always had Georgia really high. I think Oklahoma has made things interesting between Georgia and Ohio State. Brandon, this is everybody's saying fill up Todd Hartley's brand new pool with money, with all the money he wants and sign him to whatever he wants because how adept he is at tight end recruiting. That's probably the way Glenn Schumann has been with linebackers, Brandon. Like I said, throughout my years of covering the Dogs as intensely as I have, if he is able to end up with a Raylan Wilson, a TJ Allen, and then a Troy Bowles, that's kind of the best 3-pack of linebackers he's ever brought in one class.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's going to go, hold on, Jeff, wait a minute. But Quay Walker was a 2018 signee, and then Channing Tindall was also a 2018 signee, whereas Nakobe Dean was a 2019. But for him, basically, Brandon, he's really only had 5 names. You could include Puff Howard in there. You could include Tony Rojas in there. But those are really the sample size that Schumann has had for linebackers in 2023. And if he's able to stack a bowl, Brandon, if you ever just get through the show and you feel like you need a pep, you need something to get fired up on a Friday about, go to huddle.com. Go to Troy Bowles Huddle right now. Watch the first 2 minutes of that. Because you remember those old days, those old movies where you're watching the program. That movie's on my mind because of the loss of James Caan this week. But you watch these Hollywoodish movies, Any Given Sunday, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where they have this linebacker just destroying folks, which looks like an NFL crunch course VHS tape from the 80s. Man, Bowles' tape is full of that, man. Just a bowling ball one after the other. And it's kind of the part where you go, you know, he's the son of an NFL defensive coordinator and NFL head coach now. And man, he's acting like he ain't got no sense because he's just throwing that. He is just destroying and demolishing folks around this tape where you're looking like, was this staged? Because it is a fun, popcorn-grabbing highlight video to watch. I thought it was really cool. He took some pictures at Georgia holding a bat, holding that same Richard LeCount hit stick from days gone by.
He's got an axe in his top 3 edit from Hayes Fawcett. He's got an axe in his hand. Like that's scary. I mean, that's serious business right there.
Brandon, this is a chase linebacker. This is a field linebacker. This is a come off the edge linebacker. He's a guy that's going to check all the boxes you want in terms of linebackers. What Georgia did a year ago, they finally figured out that, hey, if we just leave Quay, Channing, and Nakobe on the field, they can do whatever Dan Lanning or Glenn Schumann dials up in the defense because they're so versatile. They're hitters. They're physical. They can cover. They can blitz. And when you leave those guys out there, it keeps Georgia pretty salty, whatever the offense wants to throw at them. And Bowles and Wilson and C.J. Allen, I mean, you know, it's kind of funny, Brennan, on the slide, C.J. Allen has gotten the least ink or the least amount of stars for the longest time. But when I get through looking at all these linebackers and say all 3 of these guys come to Georgia, man, it's going to be really hard for folks to figure out whether they want the 10-9-1 or they want the 11-1 or they want the guy that's the son of an NFL head coach. And Brandon, if there's one thing, we keep worrying about receivers until 2037 with the Georgia football recruiting shows. But linebackers and Georgia and defense, that's the type of guy, a defensive-minded NFL head coach. Georgia just sets up really well for Troy Bowles in a lot of areas.
I want to ask you one more thing before we let you go. Before we do that, I got to remind folks this is On the Road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel right now. And speaking of being on the road, a lot of you are this time of year. And when you are, obviously you want that great auto protection for your vehicle. And that's where AAA can step in with some big-time savings for you, because when you switch your auto insurance to AAA, you could save on average $472 in the state of Georgia. So, Dog fans, get that auto insurance from our friends at AAA, and you could be a big-time saver of some big-time money. You can call 833-718-2075 for more on that. That's 833-718-2075. Of course, coverage is subject to all policy terms, conditions, exclusions, and limitations, and subject to underwriting requirements. Insurance underwritten by Member Select Insurance Company and non-affiliated insurance companies. All right, Jeff, let's do this very quickly before we say goodbye to you here today. You know, Sadir Mitchell commits to Texas pretty quickly. You know, Shanahan, as we said before, kind of maybe leaning towards Texas A&M. There are a lot of fans that are asking the question. I think it's a fair question to ask. How much Georgia is being hurt right now by programs more aggressive on the NIL front? Maybe Antoine Jackson in Miami, an example of this too. How much do you think that the Georgia recruiting efforts are being impeded by the fact that Georgia's probably not as aggressive on the front end with NIL as some other programs are?
I'm going to say this. I think staying the course, it seems Nick Saban in Alabama and even Georgia and Kirby Smart have their own way of doing things, Brendan. They'd rather reward and enhance and induce the guys that are already on the program, that are already making plays, that have earned their way to the top. They want to incentivize those guys rather than bringing guys in that may not fit, may not be a culture fit, maybe not want to work as hard as Georgia works. I think with young people, here's something that the NIL, this stuff's fascinating, Brandon. But the one thing you don't know is how these young men will be. Some of them come from very humble roots. How they will be if they have 6 figures in their bank account or if they have 9 figures in their bank account. You don't know how hard they will work. You don't know how determined they are. There's all kinds of things with team chemistry and locker room to worry about right there. Georgia is deciding to build their program differently, the same as Alabama. They don't feel they have to buy culture and buy interest, maybe that some other programs are trying to do. Those programs, Brandon, I'm going to say this. The state of Texas is going to be the 50-yard line for NIL because you have Texas wanting to win so badly, and you have Texas A&M wanting to win so badly. And when those guys get in the same conference and they are going after the same players and they start playing each other every year, I think it will be blank check city in terms of what's going to happen in that state with NIL deals until some enforcement or some legislation or some parameters get around that. I think it's going to be an arms race between those two programs specifically in terms of, well, the other guy's spending, so we got to spend. I mean, it would be a situation at Georgia where if Alabama decided to go heavy all in on the front side of NIL, then Georgia would have to bring up their own countermeasures to do so because that's a program. I still think Georgia's a little behind Alabama in terms of national reputation and overall historical sense. But with Georgia and Alabama, you see them in a match race from 2022 on. I think those two teams are closely bunched together. But I don't think Georgia feels the need it has to do those sort of things yet because they've built the program. They've got the NFL development. They've got the trophy case now. And I think that's a reason why Georgia is not doing the things that other schools are doing because they're not chasing the players. The players are coming to them regardless.
Jeff, I think that's really interesting stuff, and we'll obviously, I'm sure, talk plenty more about this in the time to come. So thanks for being here today on The Road, assisted by AAA. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll look forward to reading plenty from you at dognation.com over the course of the weekend there as well, and talk to you back here on our program again very soon, too.
Brad, let me give you some quick facts. While we were chatting, I went and looked up Georgia's players on the top 24/7 over the last 3 or 4 cycles. The average number of players that the state of Georgia has among the nation's top 130 prospects is usually about 11, 12, 13. This time for 2024, they're at 18. Wow. So it's about 5 or 6 more players than the norm.
How about research on the fly from Jeff Sintel? What a great way to close this out. Thanks for being here, Jeff. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
See you, man. Everybody have a great weekend.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Obviously a part of a topic that we're going to keep talking about a lot, and we'll keep trying to figure it out. Another SEC coach is going to speaking out on this too. We'll let you hear what he had to say coming up in a moment as we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. By the way, speaking of Royal Caribbean, man, what an awesome time it is that we had back on our own Royal Caribbean cruise, our first ever Dog Nation cruise back in April. And you know, listen, it just gets me thinking about how much fun I'd be having right now if I was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, enjoying the beautiful weather. You know, it's like in the summertime, it's just kind of nice to be in the Caribbean and kind of get those sea breezes blowing. And, you know, listen, I just love to be there. A lot of you like to go, Alaska this time of year too. You had some cool, Alaskan type cruises or European cruises with Royal Caribbean, whatever else. But for me, I'm just kind of a simple person. I like the Caribbean itinerary. I like being at Perfect Day Coco Cay, that beautiful private island right there in the Bahamas, where you can take advantage of the thrill side, tallest water slide in North America. You can take advantage of the chill side, I should say, largest freshwater pool in the Bahamas, and whichever side you kind of gravitate to, if you're on Perfect Day Coco Cay, you realize why this private island oasis right there in the Bahamas really sets apart Royal Caribbean from anybody else kind of competing in this space. No one does it quite like Royal Caribbean does. That's true when you get off and go to the ports, but that's true when you're on the ships there too. So many fun things to enjoy. Bars, specialty restaurants, cool entertainment options. And Royal Caribbean's got it all for you. You can go ice skating on the cruise ship. How amazing is that? Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can get you hooked up here. You can find them online, tcava.com. That's the website, tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. And you can find out about which option suits you best for your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation today. I am looking forward to some big things with the Royal Caribbean here in 2023, including my own cruise coming up shortly after the season is done. So that'll be for then. But for now, still time for you to get involved with your own Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. I hope you will do just that. So let's talk Florida Gators here for a moment. They got some interesting recruiting news yesterday, and I saw some people kind of making fun of this. But then the truth is I'm probably not going to make fun of this for a reason I'll explain to you. So Florida picked up two sort of decent-sized commits yesterday. Marcus Stokes, a quarterback, they flip him away from Penn State. And Trayon Webb, a running back. You remember that, seemingly like 100 years ago, Webb was, committed to Georgia, right? He must have been 10 years old when he was committed to Georgia, because it feels like that was a long time ago. And he's still, kind of just now moving into his senior year. It's just kind of funny how long some of these guys have been in our lives. And some people kind of make fun of, Florida. Obviously, we do that all the time here. On this particular case, I'm not going to make fun of Florida, though. Not saying this is like the greatest thing that's ever happened. But in the case of Webb here, the running back, or a guy that's likely to play running back, this is an example of a recruit who was maybe trending away from Florida for a while. You remember the other day when Billy Napier wrote the open letter to Gators fans, essentially trying to calm them down because they were so up in arms? One of the reasons why they were so up in arms is because Webb was at one point thought to be trending, I believe it was towards Penn State. So the fact that Florida actually steps back in, kind of wins him back over, wins the commitment of Webb, is actually kind of an example of Florida doing a little better in recruiting. For a while, it seemed like Webb might not be going to the Gators. Now he is. So that's actually, relative to where Florida has been, probably a decent win for them. In the case of Stokes, this is sort of I think he's ranked within the top 247 from 24/7 Sports. So it's it's not an unheralded prospect necessarily, but it's probably not the kind of quarterback you can kind of build a class around necessarily. It's not the same thing as if they'd gotten the young man they were kind of fighting for the other day. They ended up going to Miami. This isn't nowhere near the same type of deal here, but it is a a 4-star-ish type player. It's certainly talent to have in the room. Not a sort of a centerpiece quarterback, probably not. But the Webb news is probably a little bit bigger than it's maybe given credit for. Maybe an example of Billy Napier stemming the negative tide, at least just briefly there on that. I saw where college football guru Phil Steele was on one of the sports shows on 92.9 The Game, sports radio station in Atlanta. He gave out his college football playoff. Of course, the Phil Steele magazine will be going to be on newsstands here pretty soon. And Steele, for the most part, kind of goes rubber stamp on this, at least a little bit. I believe these are the top 4 odds teams right now. We've told you before, it is very easy to put both Georgia, Alabama, along with Ohio State in the college football playoff. That's kind of what we're assuming is going to be the case here. Still has those 3 teams in his Final Four there as well. What we've said, though, is there's a lot of mystery related to who that 4th team might be. Phil Steele going with Clemson. And it could very well be Clemson coming out of the ACC that gets back in the college football playoff. Of course, the Tigers had been in every playoff from, 2015 through 2020 before being knocked out of last year's playoff, in large measure because they lost to Georgia in week 1 to begin the season. And Steele's got them back in the playoff. And maybe that's the case. I'm not quite so sure on that. I still don't know who my 4th playoff team is going to be. I've got big questions for Clemson, the quarterback spot, at the offensive line spots. When it comes to playmaking guys on offense in general, I'm still not quite so sure what Dabo is going to be doing on that side of the ball, now that there isn't a Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson in that program anymore. And you're going to be left to say, well, if it's not Clemson, who is your 4th playoff team? And I don't quite have a good answer to that as of yet. I think in terms of the national conversation, I think that Oklahoma may be a little undervalued right now. Now, that's not me saying that Oklahoma's going to be in the playoff. I'm not ready to do that. But when I think about Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, when I think about a little bit more defensive intensity being ushered in by the hire Brent Venables at head coach, when I think about the path through the Big 12, I have a little bit of interest right now in Oklahoma. I do. That's not me predicting them to make the playoff. But if I was looking at my 4th, could I see Oklahoma getting there more so than Clemson? Maybe so. Maybe so there on that. I told you that interesting comments from an SEC coach as it relates to NIL. It's Mark Stoops at Kentucky. And the background here is that Louisville, the in-state rival to the Wildcats, has been pretty aggressive, a lot of folks think, when it comes to the NIL stuff. Reuben Owens and some of the other sort of surprisingly high-profile commits they've gotten. That's not something that Louisville's typically done. So Louisville has been kind of thought to be a little bit of a player in the NIL space here a little bit. And Kentucky, kind of led by athletic director Mitch Barnhart, has been a lot more slow to embrace this. Well, that may be kind of changing now on the basis of some of the stuff that Mark Stoops has said publicly. I'm going to read you here a couple of comments from Stoops as reported by Tyler Thompson on Kentucky Sports Radio. So Stoops tells a bunch of boosters, I'm playing against players I know we're giving money, that the school and NCAA knows we're giving money, and we're still playing against them under the table, not even above the table like it is now. So basically he says, hey, we've played against players who were cheating or whatever else. And then he makes this plea to folks about NIL. He says, we need people to understand it's legal and it's okay. Yes, we are behind, he says, when it comes to NIL. And yes, we need money and to set aside pre-marketing dollars for the future of the football program and all of our sports. This is basically talking to business owners there in the state of Kentucky and in Lexington. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of people in Kentucky who bleed blue, man. They want to see Big Blue Nation succeed. But these are also challenging economic times. I mean, imagine this. Imagine you are a restaurant owner in Lexington and you hear this from your football coach, Mark Stoops. I need you to set aside marketing dollars to give to football players. Well, guess what? I'm just using as an example, if you're a restaurant owner, imagine what your supply chain's been like. Your ability to get kind of fresh food to serve in your restaurant. Imagine what your staffing issues have been, getting people to show up to work, getting people to sort of maintain their status as employees for you. Imagine, what it's like when you have to keep raising your prices to meet the demands of runaway inflation that seemingly has no end in sight. All of a sudden, Mark Stoops says, hey, I need you to dig deep and start giving to some of my football players. I mean, as I've told you before, if I'm a business owner in Kentucky trying to make ends meet, I may look at Mark Stoops and say, hey, you make millions of dollars. Why don't you pay these players? Because I'm struggling to pay my rent payment. I'm struggling to just turn any kind of profit whatsoever. All of a sudden now you've coming to me with this sort of crisis you have about keeping up with Louisville, whoever else you're competing with. Maybe you ought to pay these guys. I just don't know how receptive businesses are going to be right now. And, listen, if so-and-so program's got so-and-so, booster, John Ruiz, Miami, or oil dude, Texas A&M, if they're just made of money right now, then by all means have at it. But if I'm a business owner and times for businesses are as tough as they've been, I mean, they were, forced to shut down for however long, go back a couple of years ago, still trying to, come out from underneath that. All of a sudden, Mark Stoops says, hey, I need some of that money out of your business account. I just don't know how receptive certain businesses are going to be to all that in the current climate that we're in. And by the way, let's see what happens to NIL when all you've really got is the same handful of very rich people essentially just bidding against themselves for certain player services. But I get that Stoops feels like he's behind. A lot of coaches probably feel the same way. But listen, I don't know how much some of the local businesses, some of these places are going to be able to help you, just given the very real challenge a lot of these businesses are facing right now. That is just a very, very real topic here at the moment. Final thing here for our cruise around the SEC for what's turned into a very long show. I saw where Keelan Robinson, former Alabama running back, now at Texas, by the way. Robinson's kind of an interesting figure in that early season game between the Longhorns and the Crimson Tide because of the fact that he played on one side and now he's playing for the other. That's kind of interesting. But also, I guess the national championship ring and some other memorabilia, I think, too, associated with Robinson showed up on a recent episode of Pawn Stars. And I believe the title ring, yeah, there you go. So I don't know why it's more than one ring. Maybe somebody else can explain that more so than me. Maybe it's also some of the other rings there, too. But it sold, is it right, for $60,000? Is that what it sold for? 40. So it ended up selling for $40,000. And I kind of get this, I guess. I mean, if you're not that excited about being, at Alabama anymore, now you're at Texas, maybe you don't care about these rings anymore. This could be, though, an interesting opportunity. If you're a fan and you want like real, authentic memorabilia, and sometimes in college sports that's been kind of hard to get because there's not always a lot of that out there. But in a day and age in which you're going to have a lot more guys transferring, and if you won a national championship at one place and you transfer somewhere else, I mean, maybe you will. If you have a chance to make $40,000 on a ring, maybe you will sell it. And maybe for a lot of folks who have a little bit deeper pockets, listen, here's what I know. If one person's selling a ring, they're getting $40,000 for it. If 100 players are selling a ring, that ring's not $40,000 anymore. The price has come down a little bit. So in the future, if you're a big-time collector who loves your favorite college team, obviously most of the folks here cheering for the Georgia Bulldogs, In the near future, because of the transfer portal, because of the ability to sort of sell this stuff in the NIL space and, collect the money on it, something that guys like A.J. Green were once not allowed to do, Todd Gurley selling his autograph, I mean, you may have a chance to get your hands on a lot more authentic memorabilia from college football, and it could be for a lot more economic price than you could have ever imagined. That could be a fun thing for fans in the years to come if more guys do what Robinson's doing now. With the prevalence of the transfer portal, I think you're left to assume that a lot of those guys probably will do that. So worth considering. We'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll also say this very, very fast. I also know there was that rumor that came out yesterday from the blog known as Swam, which I guess is a swimming website, about some very, very surprising names being negotiated with the SEC. Virginia, North Carolina, Florida State, Clemson. I don't think anybody's really taking that all that seriously. Most of the big blue checks were pretty quick to sort of jump out there and make a very big show, peacocking their way around how untrue they felt like that was. I don't have any reason to think they're wrong, though. I don't think that rumor was probably true, but it's always interesting how the blue checks sort of line up when they feel like they've been threatened, and Swam was apparently threatening to them yesterday. But it's probably also not true, so I guess maybe I shouldn't be too critical of them. But that was out there, but we didn't really mention it during the SEC through because I don't think there's much to that. But let me tell you what there is something to. That's the Finished Long Drink, part of the big Dog Nation Duck Hunt tailgate with us coming up here pretty soon, and a big part of what we do each and every week here at Dog Nation Daily as well. And as you're heading towards a great summer weekend, I hope you are having fun, going fishing or swimming or playing golf or I don't know, whatever else you're doing, sitting on the back porch, grilling out, listening to some music. Take the Finished Long Drink with you, and you'll have an even better time because it's a ready-to-drink cocktail right there in a can. You like mixed drinks? You don't have to mix this one. It's already mixed for you. Just pop the top and enjoy it or pour it into a glass, whatever you want to do. You can pick up one of those 8-can variety packs, get 2 different cans of each of the 4 Finished Long Drink varieties, whether it's the cranberry or the Long Drink Strong or the Long Drink Zero. That's no carbs, no sugar, by the way. Long Drink Traditional. It's a grapefruit flavor to go along with a gin kick. It's just good stuff. So make sure you enjoy it today, the Finished Long Drink. If you want to find out where you can pick some up, go to thelongdrink.com, and you can find out where that is, thelongdrink.com, and you can pick up some Finished Long Drink to enjoy there today. All right, we got a good number of golden shoes to give out, so let's make a long show longer by rolling through some of these, and I'll let our producer, Michael Carvel, kind of throw these up in whatever order you would like. A lot of folks obviously having a really good time. So the new Florida quarterback commit, Marcus Stokes, is nicknamed the Joker for whatever reason. And so our buddy Mad Dog says the Gators' future quarterback is the Clown Prince of Crime, and he sees the Heath Ledger version of the Joker holding up some Florida cards there. Mad Dog is a very good Photoshopper. He really is very talented. This is very good. It's kind of a slight mockery of the new Florida quarterback commit, so good stuff from Mad Dog there. Next golden shoe, we'll give that out here there too. So our buddy Austin Kilby sent this to me, and he said, this is the same sort of video we showed the other day. Austin Kilby sent that to me as kind of an example of what the Florida program is. He says, yeah, this is the current state of Florida's program, and I believe Austin's probably right about that. That's pretty good stuff. And by the way, speaking of videos making fun of Florida, Smart One also sent this to me on Twitter there as well. Ella Dorsey, the terrific meteorologist there for CBS 46 in Atlanta, she had a funny tweet the other day. Somebody sent this to her. So here's a alligator in Myrtle Beach. By the way, y'all be careful of these alligators, man. They've been acting crazy this summer. There have been some awful stories out there about this. But here's a alligator in Myrtle Beach running with a football, and Rob Hughes says this gator was spotted with a football in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, but not an end zone in sight. And so Ella Dorsey says, looks like another sub-500 season for me for those Gators, and that's pretty funny stuff from Ella Dorsey there from CBS 46. Somebody sent that one to me, Smart One. Sent that to me there as well. And how about Kathy McCarthy, or I should say Kathy Weinhardt sent this to me. So excited that I just bought my tickets for the Dog Nation Duck Hunt tailgate. Now Amanda Weinhardt is old enough to partake, so good for Amanda there on that. It's going to be my first Dog Nation daily event. Glad I get to enjoy it with my daughter and best friend. September 3rd cannot come here soon enough. Kathy, we're certainly glad you and Amanda are going to be there on board with all of this for that. Going to be a great Dog Nation Duck Hunt tailgate, and there is still some time to get in and be there with Kathy and Amanda and everybody else. DogNation.com to get your tickets for Dog Nation Duck Hunt. Big thanks to Kroger, R.S. Andrews Long Drink, 76 Apparel, and Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. Let me also quickly say, Lousy, stinking Gators, long national title drop for them. They have no celebrations coming up. How about 4,929 days since they have won anything of note, including a national championship? And 113 days from right now, Georgia beats up on them again. So make sure you check that out. Dog Nation Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you back here on Monday for Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. Have a great weekend, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. That is what R.S. Andrews will do for you. That means your air conditioning unit, if it's not quite working the way it's supposed to, or somebody told you need a new one, maybe you can just breathe some new life into that old tired unit. R.S. Andrews can show you how. They can do it for you. It's just $99 there as well. So check them out. rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. What do you say we take your comments here and have a good time here for the moment? I'll do some YouTubes first, and we'll just have a really good time here. Phoneme Unit says 113 days until some fried gator tail. I got to tell you, I've had fried gator tail before. It is not bad. It is pretty tasty. I do enjoy a little gator tail every now and then. But y'all got to be careful of these gators. There have been some awful stories this summer about alligators. And like, I'm going to halfway joke about this. I shouldn't probably, but it's like, I think gators just sort of sit there and do nothing. And people have a tendency to think they are docile. But when a gator gets fired up and gets into action, these things move really, really fast. And you just got to be careful, man. You got to be careful around those alligators. You always see these like viral videos of people like doing goofy stuff with alligators. Alligators are just kind of like peaceful until they're not. And so y'all be careful. Let's go. Brandon says this show's running late. Yeah, we had a long one today. I sort of like we were on air on time, but we didn't crank up the show until about 10 after. And that just sort of messed everything up. Beer Cans and Batty said a gator killed a man a few weeks ago down here by Lake Seminole. Yeah. There's been one in South Carolina that I heard about. There was one, I want to say near Panama City, maybe, or somewhere kind of on that sort of Florida Panhandle area. I mean, there have been like 2 or 3 this summer that I've heard of. It's serious stuff. Serious stuff. I hate to be, bleak, but it was very serious. Let's see what else. G. Grayson here still talking about injuries. Frank Patterson says, BA, my how time flies. It's a really good point by Frank. He says, in this conference, you need as many good tight ends as you can get. Yeah, go back to Kirby after that Missouri game in 2020. He was definitely saying that. At the time, that was thought to be a little bit of a subtweet of Eric Gilbert, who was just announced that he was transferring from LSU. But the truth is, it could have referenced Oscar Delp or Landon Thomas or any number of elite players that Georgia kind of brings in there at that tight end spot because Georgia's collecting that talent. And I do think that tight ends are incredibly valuable. And at the NFL level, you give me an all-pro. Remember, there's only 2 all-pros. 2 for each position. If you give me an all-pro tight end or an all-pro wide receiver, I'll take the all-pro tight end really over the all-pro receiver. The reason is because tight end's one of those premium positions. It's a little bit like catcher in baseball or second baseman or something like that, where the number of guys who do it at such the high front-end elite level is so valuable. Whereas like at the NFL position, wide receiver, typically speaking, is a pretty deep position. That if you don't have like the all-pro level wide receiver, if you just have a good sort of Pro Bowl-ish level wide receiver, you've still got a pretty talented player. I would say the drop-off at tight end can be a little bit more precipitous. So if you give me the all-pro tight end, I'll take that any day of the week. A lot of you do like the fantasy football drafts. You'll know this. So you have a chance to draft the elite tight end because most of your leagues require playing a tight end. Get that front-end tight end because you can get more depth and value at the wide receiver position later on. Our buddy Michael Carvel, big fantasy guy, he thumbs up that. Cine OG says we need to cover 4 soon. Yeah, we do. I was actually thinking about that today. We do need that. Green Soldier kind of firing back about some of the injuries Georgia dealt with. Yeah, Chris Smith was, he was pretty hobbled. More than folks realize. John Adams says, does NIL change decommits or the highest bidder? Do you think there's an NIL advance payment before they sign? Also, NIL deals falling out just before signature examples. So, like, one of the things that has been talked about is the way in which some of the NIL stuff can be handled. Like, if you're in California, their high school athletes are allowed to receive NIL money, whereas in some states that's not the case. So, like, the one thing I don't know that anybody has a good answer for yet, or at least one that I totally understand is, so let's just say I'm Georgia, and let's say I take the commitment of Julian Sayin, the quarterback. Well, the state of Georgia prohibits laws that use NIL as an recruiting inducement. It's one of the reasons why I'm pretty sure so many people lie about NIL is because no one's going to openly admit to violating the law. But let's say that Georgia, got the commitment from Julian Sayin, and let's say that, NIL was somehow part of that. So if Georgia gave Julian Sayin $200,000, is that a violation of Georgia law, or is that fine because it's acceptable under California law? I don't quite understand that. I'm sure lawyers could charge me $500 and tell me all I need to know, but I don't quite understand that necessarily. But some of the people that have kind of reported on this a little bit more in depth. So the way that a lot of these NIL contracts seem to be structured is there's a little bit of protection against the school if the player then leaves. And in often cases, there's a huge financial incentive seemingly waiting on the other side of if you choose to stay longer, you get a lot more money for staying longer. That's kind of the way a lot of this kind of stuff is structured. I also don't believe most of the sources for a lot of these NIL articles. A lot of these NIL articles are, themselves kind of agents in the NIL space. They clearly have, a vested interest in making themselves sound bigger and more grand. And these grandiose claims go to serve that. So I think most of the stories you've seen related to NIL are only as good as the sources who are willing to go on the record for them. And simply, I don't trust those sources. I just don't. I think they're unscrupulous in some cases. So that's one of the reasons why I think a large number of what you've heard, connected to NIL money is just exaggerated from a financial standpoint. But as I've said, even if you take a portion of that exaggerated claim and say the real money is actually 1/10 of that or 1/5 of that or whatever else, you're still talking about a good bit of money. And in most cases, I believe that there are agreements in place that protect the program. So it's like if so-and-so is getting X number of dollars, obviously he's not getting all of that on the front end. He's expected to get that over the course of time, assuming that player stays in good standing with that program over the course of a number of years. Let's see what else. DMart42 says, if I remember from one of Saban's many offseason issues this year, he blames Brooks and not Jai Hall. Yeah, I mean, he basically pointed the finger to Jai Hall as aggressively as anybody can. Like don't put it past Saban to make a bunch of excuses. Like, Saban really knows how to play the blame game. It really does. I would say conduct unbecoming for someone who's as great as Saban is. Joshua Langford says, can we please make some Dog Nation merch this season? So I think I have some good news for you on that. And I hope it's what you're looking for, but we do have some new stuff coming out. And there's a lot of complicated issues when it comes to merchandise, which I won't, completely sort of bore you with. But I do think we have some really cool merchandise coming down the pike this year. And I think it is going to be some stuff that we're going to be able to sell. For the last few years, all the stuff that we've done from a merchandise standpoint has been kind of a giveaway. And I do think that because some people say, well, I love the giveaway, but what if I don't get the giveaway? I don't get the stuff. And I do certainly appreciate that and understand that. So I do think we're going to have some new merchandise options that I hope you really like. And I hope it's what you're looking for your dad, because first of all, it thrills me that's something that you'd want for your dad, or your dad would want that for himself. And obviously anything we can do to kind of satisfy that need, clearly we want to do that. So stay close, Joshua, and hopefully we got some good announcements coming up very soon that will be kind of what you're looking for. I hope that's the case. I'm very excited about some of the stuff we are going to be dropping here pretty soon, and I hope it is what you're looking for. Spencer Clark says, NIL deals changing the culture of high school athletes. They're becoming celebrities. In some respects, that's true, and maybe you might say in other respects that's kind of always been true. Maybe that's the case. But ask yourself this. Look what's happened to other high school age people who've become celebrities. How well has that worked out? How many happy stories involving childhood stars are there really? We've said this before, that when you accelerate the fame, and in some cases even accelerating the riches for a lot of these young people, And it ends up not being that great of a thing. It really doesn't, which is to say, are you going to say they should turn that down? I'm not saying they should, but I certainly wouldn't wish fame on my own children. I really wouldn't, because I think it robs their childhood from them. And I wouldn't sell my children's childhood even for $1 million. I really, truly wouldn't, because for those of your parents who understand this, the experience of your children's childhood to help raise them up during that childhood, that's a priceless experience. It's the thing that life's all about. And so I wouldn't sell that for $1 million. I really wouldn't. And so, I hope the accelerated, growth, for these young people who are going to be in some cases getting, large sums of money, or the belief they might get large sums of money. We got to be careful with that. I mean, there's already, Harry Miller from Ohio State spoken out about this, the former Ohio State player. There's already a little bit of a mental health crisis when it comes to some of these, college age athletes as it is. I hope we figure that part of this out, all for their sake there too. Let's see what else. A lot of folks going in here on Alabama in the YouTube comment section. Let me pop in here on Facebook for a moment, get a few comments there. I hope you're all getting ready for a great weekend. I hope you got something really fun you're going to be doing. I'm trying to enjoy a little bit of summer fun here this weekend, as I did last weekend there too, and just kind of get ready for the excitement of the season, which is going to be here before you know it. Joe Moody says, son, can I have some money for groceries? Sure, Mom. Just get some money out of the NIL jar. Yeah, before long that may be the case. Georgiana Olive, let me read Georgiana here, who says that in Ohio, the state legislature shut down a bill that would have allowed NIL deals for high school players. Yeah, I don't mind telling you this. I don't think high school players should be getting paid. I don't. I don't care what college players get paid. Within reason. I have plenty of issues with the NIL age that we're in, but the actual payment to players is one of my least significant concerns. But I'm going to tell you right now, I do not think high school players get paid. I just don't. And for the people who think they should, I would ask you, should the kids in the Little League World Series get paid? Like how far down should all this go? And, there's a certain kind of person that sort of doesn't really see life this way. I just think I think the damage that we would do to these young men in their formative years is more significant than the financial payoff would be. I just do. So I don't mind telling you that I want to treat high school athletes as something less than full-fledged adults. I really do. Sandy Price says Coach Hartley is going to be a nightmare for defensive coordinators for years to come. I do think tight ends create a tough matchup. I'm not smart enough to fully explain all of it. I'm not. But I do know this. When you're thinking about, how do you double team a tight end? Just talk to somebody who knows the game of football and talk about the challenges of doubling a tight end. You're either pulling linebacker, you're pulling a defensive back. You're kind of pulling from a position group that already has a lot of responsibilities on the field. So if you're doubling a tight end, my guess is it's way easier to run the football. It's certainly way easier to be a wide receiver in that situation. Or if you're not doubling a tight end, finding the right guy to match up, as I said before. Okay, so if you've got really prolific tight ends, on one respect, it would just seem like, well, you just put a better cover guy on them. But all of a sudden now, you are voluntarily putting a weak player, not weak necessarily, but weaker player against a stronger player. You're voluntarily creating a matchup where you're giving your opponent a strength advantage. And that's still really important. For those of you who played high school level things like that, when you think about running across the middle and some of that kind of stuff, a huge portion of that is just having the strength to get in front of the player on one of those crossing routes or one of those, slant pattern type routes, just being strong enough to get in front of that guy. Or as a defensive back, being strong enough to prevent that from happening. A lot of that kind of route running stuff just kind of comes down to who's the stronger dude to be able to assert himself in that situation. A lot of basketball is the same way. Are you strong enough to dribble past someone? It's not all speed and quickness. Some of it's just strength. And so, don't discount, the challenge of trying to guard a prolific pass catcher if that guy's just stronger than you, and that's what many tight ends are going to be. Matt Rukavina says the largest Royal Caribbean cruise ship sailed from Galveston. It is a nice cruise port down there. He says maybe I bet a Dog Nation daily cruise leaving out of Texas. Hey, listen, I'd be in favor of that. I've actually never been to Galveston Island before. I'd like to do that. John Foster, very funny in here. Ooh, Philip Jordan Wells is a good idea. How about some duck tenders at the Dog Nation party? I've never had is it like duck l'orange? Is that something that people eat? Duck l'orange? I've never had duck, I don't believe. I've always wanted to try turducken. I've never had turducken. John Madden used to love turducken. I've known people who've liked turducken. I've never actually had it. So maybe having a little duck, that's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Jonathan Aaron says, might as well make the show 2 hours, give the people what they want. He says, more BA a day keeps the doctor away. I don't know that we've tried to make this one 2 hours, but it's certainly heading that way right now, but I am glad you're enjoying it. Randy Hall says, Searles is not on the level as the rest of the Georgia, I guess, comparing him to other Georgia assistants. I mean, I think the jury's still out. I mean, there were a lot of, pointed questions asked when Sarah was hired. Just fairly, that's probably the case. So while I understand where those concerns come from, I really do. Let's keep in mind, Georgia did win with Ernest Green last year. Georgia did keep Amarius Mims in the fold. I think the Georgia offensive line for this upcoming season on the field has a very good chance of being better than what this unit was on the field last year. I think that's the case. So I guess I want to try to keep an even-handed approach to that. There's a reason why we brought this up on the show today. I think there's some legitimate concerns right now for what Georgia is doing with its offensive line recruiting. And you see what happens to a program like Clemson if that position group falls by the wayside. It's one of the things that may be preventing Clemson from being elite. I think Georgia's a long way away from ever getting to that point necessarily. So let's see. I mean, you do have to produce both on the field and in recruiting, and let's see if Searles, does that. I think there's still a very good chance that he will, but there are some big offensive linemen right now who may be going other places. Daniel Aldrich says he's going to be laying around the pool with some grandchildren here this weekend. That sounds like a very good way to spend a weekend for sure. Very good weekend for sure. Randy also wondering if Kroger has a special on duck for that first game. So can you just go to Kroger and buy duck? Is it like just there? Can you go to the poultry section and get duck? I don't know. That's a good question. I wouldn't mind having some. Bill Sanders says anytime I say we really got to go, you can count at least 10, 15 more minutes. Yeah, that's typically the case. We're also usually just kind of pretty relaxed on a summer Friday. I think that's what got us in trouble today. Is I was just a little too casual off the top end. And I mean, it was like 10, 12. We hadn't even started the regular show yet. So that's probably where we kind of got in trouble on that. Because I think from a content standpoint, we probably weren't all that much longer. Although we did do, it's probably still long. But I'm glad that, a good number of you still enjoy it. Let's see what else. Tim Godfrey says, what's the news on Adam Anderson? I don't have anything new on Anderson. Is there something new out there on Anderson? I don't have anything on Anderson. I guess I'd like to know, but I don't have anything on that. Sandy Price says, just think about a 3 tight end set. I mean, I think you could do some stuff like that. I really do. I think you could do some 3 tight end sets, maybe a little bit. I've said before that there's still probably only room for a couple tight ends to have really big seasons. That's probably the case. But given the overall depth in the room, that second tight end that goes alongside Brock Bowers, maybe it's Eric Gilbert here for this year, that's still the chance of having a very big level of production there. John Foster says Anderson's still waiting to go to trial. No new news on that. Thank you, sir. Joel Moody says ducks are fun to shoot, but not too tasty. Yeah, I mean, I've never been duck hunting, but it seems like people have a great time doing that. Ducks seem kind of small to me. Like, I'm a pretty big eater, unfortunately. Bigger eater than I should be. Like, do you get decent meat from a duck? I mean, it seems like you'd need a couple ducks to get good meat, right? But it does look like shooting a duck would be really fun. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says she thinks wild duck is really good. I guess I'd just be curious how much meat you get from one. Hugh Nash's wife, Megan, celebrating a birthday. Hugh, please tell her we said happy birthday. Certainly. Chad Williams mentioning duck liver. Is that foie gras? Is that what that is? like that's one of those things, like, I'm not quite fancy enough to ever have eaten. And I don't quite know that when you think about what foie gras, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, what it is, like, it's kind of gross. A little bit gross. But it's also like this super, like, intense delicacy. But that's what duck liver is. It's foie gras, right? And it's kind of a depressing thing to think about how it's made. Keith Fold says that ducks are bigger than chickens. Not them steroid-filled chickens I'm eating. I'm eating some pretty big chickens these days, it seems like. Hugh, good to see you here. Okay, Bill Sanders says, boy, we have a lot of very fancy people in our comment section. He says foie gras is goose liver, not duck liver. So there you go there on that. Lucy Bowers Boykin says squirrel is good too and has very little meat. Same goes for quail. The game that I want to eat that people say is really good is elk. I've never had that before. I'd like to have some elk. Like, I've had I don't love like deer meat, but I do like deer meat, like, say, chili. I've had some good deer meat chili before that's been really good. I've been told that elk meat is really good. I'd like to have some of that. All right, anything else? We got to go. Over at dognation.com. Final comments. Hemingway says that duck is awesome, but difficult to cook correctly. Good duck is awesome. Everything else is awful. I could see that being true. I could too. Hemingway also says foie gras is, if I'm saying that correctly, is diseased fatty goose liver, not something I care for. Yeah, so like you just, my understanding is you just keep feeding the goose just until, like, the liver, I mean, it's just, ugh. And I have pretty high tolerance for meat. I don't get grossed out by thoughts of, a lot of meat type stuff, but that's pretty rough. BA's listening face. That's really funny. He says, my wife, are you still on Dog Nation? Are you going to do anything else this morning? That's really good. That's really funny stuff. Cam Hasty says elk is fantastic. Yeah, I've heard that it is. And just what a satisfying thing to think about, like, these big elk, beautiful creatures. To think that you could, that's just a great experience, right? Go elk hunting, what a talk about connecting with nature, to be able to provide your own meal coming from an elk. That's just really something. DT says Ted's Montana Grill's got a lot of game. So I do like a bison burger. I do. I mean, I don't eat a ton of bison burger, but do I like bison burgers probably as well as about anything? I really probably do. I like a good bison burger. Senior Dog 54 says Brock Bowers is a duck hunter. Maybe he can hook you up. Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. Like I said, it always looks really fun. Randy Hall also mentioning that Trayon Webb's been decommitted from Georgia and Oklahoma. Yeah, it feels like we've been talking about him for 10 years. It really does. I mean, it's just amazing. Hemingway, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Cam Hasty. That's very funny. Very funny. All right. He also says, not sure they dunk hunt in Napa, California. I guess you probably got to go somewhere else to be able to do that. Hemingway also mentioned the idea of a Dog Nation polo shirt. So I don't know about the polo shirts, but I do know we have a really fun line of T-shirts that could be coming out. I do know that. There's also a comment here at dognation.com. I'm not quite so sure I can use the username or the comment, but I did see it. I'll just say that. I did see it. All right, let's see. Good stuff. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'll check out the AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at AJC.com. Maybe you can figure out what Phil Goslin was doing last night on the base pass. Like, what happened there? Good ball game, totally ruined by what I thought was a bad base running blunder late. Braves miss out on the chance for a 4-game sweep of the St. Louis Cardinals. But I tell you this, though, Spencer Strider, man, that is a prospect. Braves have some good young pitching, and Strider right now is as fun to watch as anybody. He may be as fun for me to watch as anybody on the mound in the National League right now. He is a blast. But a rough ending for the Braves last night. More on that, ajc.com. Also, plenty of other stuff going on there, too. Big weekend plans. You can read about that there at ajc.com there as well. Let's see what else is going on there with our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as we head towards the weekend. All kinds of great stuff, all kinds of great things. You can check all of that out. Also, very soon, in upcoming days, the final announcement of the first induction class for the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. You can get that from our friends at the AJC before you know it there as well. I'm really excited about that. I'll look forward to telling you who I voted for there as well. So enjoy that. Have a great weekend. Also check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust RS Andrews to do that for you. Hope you have a great, great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday, 9:45, First and 15, 10 a.m., all across the other video platforms after that. For Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then.